Hi everyone, my name is Stan and welcome to A Russian Opinion. If you're going to be watching this on my other channel, the Russian one, добро пожаловать на канал сФилином, меня зовут Stanislav. Today we have an interesting guest. His name is Benoit. He's from Belgium and he's going to not only tell us his story about where he's living and why he is living where he is living, and we're also going to be discussing a few interesting topics. So please stay till the very end, put your thumbs up or thumbs down, write your comments, and enjoy the conversation. Benoit, thank you very much. Welcome to the channel, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey Stan, thanks for having me. I'm a Belgian citizen. I live in Russia. I live in St. Petersburg already 4 years, except in 2020 I was a few months in Belgium, but otherwise I have roots here in this city. I came the first year under a student exchange program to study Russian as a foreign language. And then I stayed because, life goes on and all these things. And I always wanted to go to St. Petersburg. It was like a dream. And when I received the first visa, I was like, my life is gonna totally change. I mean, it was like a dream from some people have a dream to go to the US. It's like American dream. I had this like Russian dream, I called it. And I'm a compositor. And in the first few months of my being a student in St. Petersburg, I was in touch with this guy, Sergei Munier, that I met a year prior in Belgium. And when he and some girl in a think tank, they showed me pictures of what's going on in Donetsk in 2016 and before that. So by then I was, before that, I was in Belgium, a professional photographer for 5 years plus. And so we had this meeting in this group, and I promised him I would go to Donetsk and make photos of what's going on. And I didn't know how, when, I just promised. It's like, was this idea like just popped up. And a year later, it was in Moscow at the time. I was in St. Petersburg, and we arranged and helped me arrange accreditation that we go to Donetsk together and make a film about the situation, about the war then, that the front line didn't move for 2 years then. We were still active, like ritual artillery, like it was stable, but not peace. It was still bombing, like постоянное bombing.
Where can we
So we
find
made
this? Where can we find this documentary, and where can we find you on social media?
on my YouTube channel, in my documentaries playlist, it's called Last Autumn in Donetsk. And I'm a compositor, and this film and the films I made after that, I scored my own music and some cadre, I forgot English already.
Some shots, maybe.
Some shots they don't have much except like the atmosphere and with the music, and it's very slow film, like it gets you. And in first few weeks, people stole the film and put it on Wiki page, and I calculated like in few weeks like 50,000 views. This film alone. And the next year I filmed in Crimea in 2018. Donetsk was in November 2017. In 2018 I filmed in Crimea. I met the Glava Krima, Aksionov, and other people. I interviewed people on the street just to have a view of people who live there, what they think about Crimea being back to Russia. And in 2019 I filmed in South Ossetia for the 11th anniversary of the war with Georgia, that they finally would split thanks to the help of Russia. And that's about the only 3 films I made about politics and that region. I made other films and short documentaries, but not about this region.
Well, I have
So,
go ahead.
So I'm kind of small expert on this region for my country, because in my country they don't know anything about these wars. And those who do seek the truth, they're getting ignored because they are bothering people. So they arrange that they're ignored or lose their position, or they don't get killed, but they will get boycotted, or cancel culture, like applies not just to pop music but also to politics.
Okay, before we get into that, because I have an interesting follow-up question regarding Crimea, for example. But before we get into that, so when you realized that you were going to Russia, from what you've been saying, obviously you were quite excited. Did you have any kind of stereotypes in your head of what Russia was going to be like? And when you arrived to Russia, did those stereotypes break? Anything you can comment on that?
Well, for me, but I'm some kind of marginal, yeah. I was drawn to Russia, so I didn't have any bad stereotype because, as I said, I was a professional photographer for 5 years, and very early I found out that our media are manipulated. For example, this is totally off topic, but for example, in December 2013, I was in Lebanon. I was in Beirut, and in December 4th, some commander from Hezbollah got shot with guns in the parking lot. And I took my camera, I went to make pictures. I was very quick on the scene. I found on the scene, I asked people who were there, took pictures, ran back to hotel, uploaded my pictures to my agency. I won't quote it, but National Agency of Pictures. And for 2 hours, they wouldn't put the pictures on the store for newspapers. They were covering it up. And when AFP put their pictures, which I could see because they have shared database, and then they put my pictures because it's already leaked anyways. So I very early learned that from sure it's controlled. So I wasn't surprised when I made the film and all over the press in Russia that some Belgian guy went to see Donetsk for himself and tells the truth. But in my country, it's totally ignored. And usually when some Belgian does anything worthwhile in other countries, it's all over the news in Belgium, this, that, blah, blah, blah. But my film deranged, bothered people, so they don't talk about it. Just ignore it.
Okay. But when you were in Crimea, you said you were interviewing people. What kinds of vibes, what kind of information were you getting? Because as we know in the West, they like to say that Crimea is occupied and that people there, because it's an occupation, are not obviously pro-Russian. They need to be liberated, etc., etc. This is the thought process of Western governments. But when you were there and you were speaking to regular people, what was the information that you were getting?
Everybody I met there was glad that Russia went back to Crimea went back to Russia, mostly because of the benefits. Even people don't care about politics, one way or the other. We're glad that they were investing in the region in all levels. And there are some rare people who were unhappy that, for example, they lost access to go back to Ukraine because they couldn't renew their passport and these kind of things. But 99% of people were very glad, and there is nothing. There was in 2018. There was nothing that even suggested remote possibility of a war. So yeah, the overwhelming majority of people were glad.
And
Even in my film, there is an Ukrainian who just cheers that they went back to Russia because they made the region better. And before that, Crimea was like some back courtyard that was neglected and not cared for at all.
yeah, we were there in
Very poor
2000. We were there in 2019, and I've seen some of the neglected areas, and we traveled on the new road, Tavrida. We saw construction of like schools and hospitals and repairs being made here and there. It's quite unfortunate that the double standards of the West show themselves in such bright colors, or that they exist, because here you have people in Crimea, an autonomous region that was part of Ukraine, that had their own constitution, that said that we don't want to be part of your illegal coup, your revolution, and they decided to do their own thing, but yet they're largely ignored because it's inconvenient for the military-industrial complex in the West to lose such a massive area where they can station their ships, build naval bases, etc. But it's great to hear that you, as a foreigner, you traveled there and you spoke to regular people. You mentioned that you were also in Donbass. You were in Donetsk, correct?
First film, yes, he was in Donetsk and in and around Donetsk up to the front line. Also, a beautiful shot in that film is in Saur Magila. It was my best. At the time, I had the drone. I was doing a lot of drone filming. That wasn't my best drone shots, and it just like came naturally. And the colors and the dark earth and the autumn colors leaves are wonderful pictures. And this I made interview with Sergei while we were walking, while I was piloting the drone, and it was interesting conversation in that place too. But the front line was little active. but stable at the time,
And
5 years ago.
who were the fighters in the front line? We know that they were volunteers from Russia. There were some, yes, but did you find that the majority were people who were actually from that republic, or were there other forces present there?
When I was there, there was almost everybody who was there was a resident of Donetsk, and there was one volunteer, two actually from Russia, and one volunteer from Holland. And then with this interview, and he admits that he can never go back to Holland. Because in my country, and in Holland, for example, probably is the same thing. It's a crime to fight a foreign war. And they will ignore it if you're on their side, but if you're on the other side, for example, this guy from Brazil, he fought in Donetsk, for Donetsk. He went back to Brazil, and then these Ukrainians had a PMC, a private military company, to send people to Syria to guard all fields, Akranchik. He said, he wrote them, I fought against you. Is it okay if I can work for you? And they say, sure, okay, we have amnesty, blah, blah, blah. He flies there. Now he's 15 years in prison for attempted murders and just being the other side's attempted murders. So I didn't want to fight him anyway. I think it was more useful making a film. But yeah, the people from the West went to volunteer there, and it leaks out. Even if it doesn't, they find out anyways. They can never go back to their country. Never.
Well, I mean, you obviously have friends and family who are back in Belgium, and they know that you're a filmmaker, and they know that you're in Russia. How do they view you? Do they look at your films? Do they agree or disagree with you? How do they react to the information that you present to them?
Well, I had a few friends tell me that, it's great that you made that film, but, and then there's some excuse and not to share it, because now if they share it, they're gonna be ostracized. And they're just guys, I'm already ostracized in the sense I'm just being ignored. I don't mind being ignored. If you don't watch my film, don't watch my film. But it's a hypocrisy that they sit and watch the official news, and they don't want to watch other source because it disturbs the little comfort, and they're like, like,
I know what you mean.
they just don't care. They just don't care. They don't care their own poor. Why would they care the poor in some region far away?
Well, they care now. For me, what really troubles me as a Russian is that this hypocrisy. It's one thing for it to be a little bit hypocritical, and maybe obviously people in the Netherlands and people in Belgium should support their country. That's quite obvious. That's quite normal. But when you have countries and people completely ignore all the atrocities that have been happening in eastern Ukraine for 8 years by their own government, and now all of a sudden they start caring, to me, that really troubles me deep down inside, that they only care if it's somebody who they care about. If it's somebody in the eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass, for example, they don't care. They don't want to hear anything about it. Whereas, I mean, here on our side, I actively raise money to send to refugees, no matter if they're Ukrainian or Russian, if they're actually affected by the current military operation. I want them to get help, and Russians want them to get help, and we do help. And there are various people on the ground who are giving medicine and food and everything like that. And obviously here we don't want a conflict. It's just we found it to be, unfortunately, a necessary thing to do because we were backed into a corner. But it's very unfortunate that people in the West only care when they're told to care.
It's even worse than you say. They only care even if they heard something. Because I remember I followed the Syria war very closely. And I remember they only started to care when the guild started to vandalize Palmyra. So it's even worse than don't care until someone they know. They don't care until something they know.
Okay.
And sometimes it can go that far, selfishness.
Now, I know we already touched a little bit upon this, but you wanted to have a full-out conversation about the information blockade in the West and the propaganda and the lies. So could you please speak a little bit about that?
Well, I usually say to say it short, I usually say that I understand that every country will present the news in an angle that benefits their interests. And that was fair game until the 90s. But now I realize our media in the West and the media in Western Europe are not independent from the US altogether. They will blatantly lie, completely lie about situations now again and again. Because it's not just enough to show some angle or omit some fact. They will just change the whole thing. And that gives me cognitive dissonance when I try to show something and they don't even believe, can't even agree on the facts to discuss them. And I'm not a journalist. When I made my film in Donetsk, I felt compelled to do that because the journalists in my country don't do their jobs. So I had to interfere, like emission, in French, émission. I had to do it because they don't do their job. And I had to show something, like to show a little flash of truth that to at least cast doubt that they don't know everything. And so some people have access to real information, and like maybe it's irrelevant. For me, it was important for me to do that, to share some truth and give some light of truth about this war, because nobody cared. I was crying in the desert 5 years ago about this effort of genocide going on. Nobody cared. Now people care, but now it's a little bit late. Too little, too late.
It's what something else that bothers me a little bit is that when and the US actually is quite good at this, because they'll actually say what they're doing. So for example, there was, and I have this saved, there was an interview with somebody who was working in the US government. I can't remember their name, but I have the interview saved. And they basically said that they actively lie on purpose. And the interesting part is, like, they do this to prevent something from happening.
We start this hour with the U.S. using intelligence to fight an information war and doing it to Russia for months now, and it's working. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delaney live in Washington. Ken, I want to start by giving people an example of what this is so they know what we're talking about. Take a look.
They're also suggesting that Ukraine has biological and chemical weapons in Ukraine. That's a clear sign he's considering using both of those.
Ken, can you explain to our viewers what was going on there and what NBC News has learned about that claim this week from 3 different U.S. officials?
Yeah, that was a great example of what we're talking about. That was based on declassified intelligence, but we're also told the intelligence wasn't very clear about what exactly was going on. And they decided to disclose it as a way of deterring Russia from doing that and putting the world on notice that this could happen. And that's what's going on here, the big picture. This is an unprecedented use of declassified intelligence. We've never seen this level of information warfare before from the U.S. government. And what they're doing is they're trying to preempt the Russians, get ahead of Russian disinformation, even mess with Vladimir Putin's brain, as one person put it, leave him off balance to try to show that the United States knows what Russia is up to and is going to get ahead of it. It's really rather remarkable. Another example was when they announced that Russia had gone to China to ask for help with getting some weapons. That hasn't come to pass yet, and it was almost a way of putting China on notice. Hey, we know what's going on here. Don't let this happen. So really interesting and unprecedented use of intelligence here, Allison.
Yeah, Ken, as you just said, not just intelligence here, unprecedented use. One U.S. official telling you it doesn't even have to be solid intelligence when we talk about it. It's more important to get out ahead of them. Putin specifically, before they do something, it's preventative. What else have you learned about that strategy?
Well, you know, that may have been a little too candid for some folks at the White House. Their message is basically everything we say is vetted and rock solid. And there is a process. It's run by the National Security Council. It's so robust that the Director of National Intelligence and other intelligence agencies have had to surge staff and resources to this declassification process because they have to scrub this intelligence to make sure that whatever they're releasing doesn't expose sources and methods. But that source was absolutely correct. It's clear what the strategy is here, is to get stuff out that is designed to, again, show the Russians, the United States knows what they're doing, put the world on notice that this is happening. Remember, they talked about that false flag operation that they thought Russia was going to try to do at the start of the invasion. That never came to pass, but that may have been preempted by the U.S. releasing that information out.
But that really bothers me, and I'm holding myself back here because people have seen that information when it was publicized everywhere that Russia was planning a chemical attack, and my non-Russian friends in the West were sending me these articles and were saying, this is how brutal you are, you live in a dictatorship, they're going to do a chemical attack. And then the US comes out and says that that was a fabrication. But people probably didn't see that, they probably forgot, and nobody says a thing. Life goes on. And I don't know what will be the straw that will, break the camel's back. But I'm really hoping that people in Europe will sooner or later realize that their current masters don't have the best interests, and that peace and trade with Russia will only benefit literally every single person living in Europe and in Russia.
I know that, but there are people like that, actually. There are many of them, but they hide. It's like an underground scene. There is a large underground scene of people in Europe who are fans of Russia and who are sick with imperialism and sick with all these economic elites, dictatorship, and making country in debt and purpose and all these things. But they live in hiding, because if they come out and say it, they will lose their job, they will lose their partner, and because cancel culture is not just about music, it's about on every wake of life in Europe. If you don't think like us, you're not one of us, and I will make scandals so that you lose your job or something.
But it's and we can see cancel culture is quite powerful, because Russian athletes, musicians, other people have been banned or fired simply for being Russian, and they don't even have to support the current conflict at all, but they're still let go of their positions, from their positions. But there are those people who believe in everything, and they succumb to this mass hysteria that's going on. And I know this is something that you wanted to touch upon as well, so could you please elaborate on that part?